No better way to step into episode 2 than by having the wonderful Camilla Harper on the show. Camilla's curiosity and excitement for life radiates from every part of her being. Her ability to embrace the combination of limitless opportunities and transformative life teachings in a way that only an old soul knows. From navigating the migration to Australia from South Africa in her early teens to coming runner up on an early season of Big Brother, her slingshot into fame landed her a spot on top tier commercial radio, early motherhood, and a rehab in Thailand. She shares a story from almost 13 years of sobriety and a glow that warms every room that she's in. I'm proud to share this story with you, so sit back and enjoy the journey of Camilla Harper. Camilla, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I was actually really nervous at first because the last couple of times we've caught up, I found myself having this verbal diarrhea whenever I'm in your company. So, well, let's hope that happens today for your sake, that I just let it all come out.
Beautiful. Let's go on a journey.
Sure.
So, where did you grow up?
I was born in South Africa in 1983. I grew up there until I was 13 years old. And so that was an interesting time in South African history because we were at the precipice of apartheid and segregation. Kind of didn't really understand that that was the dirty water that I was swimming in at the time. I just kind of grew up around it. But apartheid ended in 1994. So we immigrated to Australia in 96.
Was that quite a spontaneous decision or had it been something in the making?
So there was a lot of crime in South Africa at the time. A huge gap between wealthy people and people who were really, really struggling. And car crime, carjackings were at an all-time high. And my father was hijacked, actually, and held at gunpoint by two people. And when he came home from that experience, he kind of considered the idea of having a weapon in our home. And after considering that very seriously, he made the decision that that was not something he wanted to do. But I think it really scared him, actually, about our future there. And so that was the catalyst for the move.
Wow. And when it came to the discussion around the family and actually picking Australia or making that decision, how did that land for you?
I think we knew it was coming. My parents had discussed it with us. They went to England and did a recce, had a look around. They made the decision that England wasn't for them. They also went to the US and had a look around and did the same. Just were quite certain that the US wasn't right for us as a family. And without even visiting Australia, we had some family in Australia. My mum's cousins had immigrated many, many years before, like 30 years before. And so, yeah, without even checking Australia out, they made the decision that that would be good. And so Melbourne became our home. We landed in Melbourne.
Wow.
In 1996.
How old were you at the time?
13.
13.
Which is an interesting developmental period, isn't it? You just kind of stepped into teenagehood. I went into high school. My younger sister went into primary school. She's a couple of years younger than me. And she went to primary school and she had this wonderful experience of like swapping sandwiches and meeting people and coming home and telling us all about how everybody loved that she was so different and it was great. And I went to school and people did not love that I was different. They did not love that I had a different accent. And yeah, it was a challenging time. I was bullied quite a lot. And I think by the time I was about 15 or 16, I'd almost dropped my South African accent because I just knew inherently that I needed to assimilate.
Mm.
Yeah.
So what was your first experience of Australia minus the bullying? It's like your impression. Like what's Australia like for a 12-year-old coming from South Africa?
I was struck that the kids didn't have the same level of respect for education that I did. In South Africa, you know, I was very clear that education was my ticket to prosperity, that I needed to sit at the front of the class and respect the teacher and keep quiet and do the work. And I remember walking into my high school and there was this kid who had bright blue hair. He was clearly stoned, not that I knew what that was about at the time, but he looked out of his mind. And I was like, oh my God, what is this place? So, you know, here's the thing about a 12 or 13-year-old's perspective is it's quite insular, isn't it? You know, I didn't really understand the workings of Australia on the whole at the time, but the first thing that struck me was the way that my school worked. And that was that there was, you know, popular kids, and the popular kids were very rebellious, and some of them did drugs, and they wagged school, or wagged. I will clarify that for people who are not from Australia. Wagging is when you cut class or you don't go. And I was not that kid. Like, I would walk in and say, hello, miss. And I would greet her or him, and I would say thank you at the end of class, and I would sit at the front, and that did not make me popular. But it was just ingrained in me as being respectful and, yeah, a way to treat my education, I suppose, at the time.
And do you feel you were able to maintain that throughout the rest of high school?
No, I don't think that. I think that I think my respect for my studies probably started to fall away when I was about 16. I got into drinking quite young, and that kind of got in the way. I mean, I think I was always a respectful student. I was always polite. I was never overtly rude to any teachers. I didn't intentionally cut class. But I think that my drinking definitely got in the way of my academics, for sure, from a very young age. You know, I am a sober alcoholic of close on 13 years. Next month will be 13 years. So, you know, I never drank and used drugs like a normal person. So as soon as that kind of came into my life, it got in the way of me being able to, you know, get things done.
Was that quite prevalent with the people you were hanging out with?
Yeah, I think that drinking culture among Australian teens is very common. Yes, definitely all my friends drank, smoked a bit of pot, but I kind of have this inner allergy to booze, and so when I start, I can't stop. And it was very marked from a very young age. Like, I would notice I had friends that would have a few drinks and then they would like wrap up and they would go to bed, and I was like, I just wanted to keep going. And that was obvious to me from being quite young. But yeah, it was definitely prevalent among all of the kids in my year level. Mostly, I think there was only a handful of kids that probably didn't drink.
So during that time in high school, did you have a close group of friends? Did you feel that up past 16 you developed more of a social life? How did it look?
I was very different. I think, you know, people have said to me before, you're an old soul, or you're wise beyond your years. I mean, I don't even know what that actually means. That's a very nice compliment, but I think as a teenager that can be quite confusing. If you have a high EQ, if you are sensitive, if you understand the world differently, which I inherently did because I came from a completely different country and had to assimilate, that can be difficult. I felt like I had to hide parts of myself. I felt like there were parts of me that were too much, too big, you know. Yeah, I felt that from quite a young age. So I did feel different than the kids in my class.
Did the drinking kind of coincide with that, correlate with the...
Well, hey, isn't booze an amazing superpower when you can... Yeah, you're nodding a lot. Isn't it, for me, I can only speak from my own experience. It was like having a really cool friend that I could like tap into, and this alter ego would come out, and I was loud and confident and all the things. And yeah, it kind of gave me this ability to fit in. Yes, for sure. And I felt lit up when I drank. I felt really lit up. It was like, the light came on. Everything felt kind of smoother and easier, but it betrayed me pretty quickly. Like I was not someone, people talk about, I know a lot of people who talk about how there are consequences to their alcoholism or consequences to their drinking from a young age. For me, the consequences were mostly on the inside. Like from a very young age, I would drink, but then that would follow with quite a lot of anxiety.
Yeah. Even in the early days?
Even in the early days, I felt quite early on, this isn't really normal comparatively. And it was interesting because a very close family friend, we were at their house and they happened to be sober for a really long time. And he was talking about AA. And, you know, everybody in my family drank. I come from quite a lot of drinking and codependency and that kind of stuff. So everybody else was drinking. So for him to be talking about AA, it really stood out to me. And I leaned in and I said to him, I think I might be an alcoholic. And I think I was about 16 at the time. And he laughed heartily and said, you would not be an alcoholic. You can't possibly know that. But I actually did. Like deep down, I think I kind of knew that I drank very differently from other people. And my response to that uncomfortable feeling around my drinking was to kind of wear it like a badge of honor. Like, I can drink better than anyone else. I can keep up with the boys. I'm one of the boys. You know, drinking's my superpower, whatever. You know, that was kind of the way I responded to that.
It's incredible awareness at that age.
Yeah, it is actually. I think, yeah, I suppose, but that is me, you know, that is kind of me. I kind of, my lovely sponsor, who's been in my life for a really long time now, jokes about perks and quirks, things about us that are, you know, our assets, and things about us that might be like our character defects or flaws or things that aren't so great. And sometimes the waters between the two can be a bit murky, right? Like sometimes the two can coincide. Like, for example, competitiveness could be a character flaw, but it can also be an asset. She talks about perks and quirks, and I think one of my perks in life is that I've always had this desire for self-reflection and this desire to know myself better. I was born that way. It's not something that I get necessarily from my own family. I was a bit the black sheep in that respect, but I've always had that desire to know myself better. And is that a perk or a quirk? Not sure. I think maybe both.
It's a fine line.
Yes, for sure.
So after high school, what happened next?
So I decided to take a year off, and I ended up in a direct sales job where drinking was so much a part of the culture. It was fabulous. I had landed. I was like, this is great. And it was mostly men too. And so I would work my butt off during the day. We would literally do door-to-door sales, and then we would drink. We would drink, and it was great. But again, you know, many of them could turn it off. And I kind of knew that I was also on slippery ground. I started dating a guy who was quite a lot older than me at the time. He happened to be one of the bosses at the business. That is one of... When I was younger, that seemed to be one of my patterns, is going out with people that I worked with. And yeah, we dated for a while. It was a very intense relationship because he was so much older than me and just had a lot more life experience, right? So that was my first landing out of high school. And then I went to university for a while. But I found university very challenging. You know, I found it difficult to make class. I found it difficult to concentrate. I found it difficult to not be in the party scene. I think that was when drugs had probably arrived properly on the scene for me. I was doing quite a lot of party drugs on the weekends. And, well, what goes up must come down, you know? So during the week, I would generally feel fairly flat and absent-minded, and so uni was tricky for me.
how was that then showing up for door-to-door sales?
Oh, that job was done. That
that was
job was
done.
cooked.
Yeah.
Me and the guy had broken up by that stage, and I started seeing someone who was more my own age, country boy, lovely country boy who I absolutely adored, and that was probably a more appropriate relationship for me. But again, it's not lost on me that I kept kind of landing with people who really like to drink and party. He was from a country town in Melbourne or outer Melbourne, out Victoria, that's probably more appropriate to say. And, they drank a lot. A lot of like dirt biking, and drinking and partying and, bonfires and all the fun stuff. But I'd kind of landed again with another group where my drinking was normalized.
Yes.
I was very much attracted to that kind of scene.
So maintaining that lifestyle and then going to university when
impossible.
you could. So what happened? Did you just end up deferring?
I did defer. I kind of, so I'll rewind a little bit. I think it was 1999 or so, around the time of 9/11, actually. Was that in 1999? I think it was.
Yeah.
So it was around the time of 9/11. I remember because it happened simultaneously. This television show called Big Brother had landed on Australian television. And it was a total juggernaut. It was totally different from anything that we had seen as an Australian culture. 12 people on a show for all of this time, unfiltered, literally being watched by cameras all throughout the day. And I was sitting there, I can't remember how old I was young, And I was with my bestie at the time. She was in bed with me and we were watching my tiny little TV. And I looked at it and I said to her, that is so cool. Oh my God. And she went, you would be great on that show. And I was like, I know, wouldn't I? And she said, you should go on it. And I was like, I'm going to. One day you'll see. And she was like, I believe you will. And the universe may or may not have been listening if you believe in all of that stuff, but the seed was planted. And so I deferred from university all there many years later. And one of the first things that I did was I tried out for this show called Big Brother, and I lined up with all these other people and I got in front of the producers, which was hard in itself to do. And they went, no, you're not for us. And I was like, oh, way to go crush my dreams. Like, this has been my aspiration since I was like 16. And so I walked away and went, well, that sucks. But I tried out the year afterwards in 2005 for the 2006 season. And the producers remembered me and they said, wow, you've got some gumption coming back. And I said, I do. This is what I want to do. And I shared with them my story, actually. I shared with them how I was born in South Africa and how I shared with them that stuff, and they were really interested in that. They found that really interesting. And in fact, my season, so I landed on Big Brother with these 12 other people. My season had a lot of people from very different backgrounds. That was their, there's definitely a loose premise to each season, and that was ours. And so I deferred from university and eventually got onto this TV show called Big Brother. And I had a really great job in a nightclub before that, which was really fun. Those people were like my family at the time. I absolutely adored them. But of course, the party scene in a nightclub was turned up to level 10. So I would work and party and work and party. And then I got on Big Brother and life changed immeasurably overnight, pretty much.
So just to clarify, what season was that of Big Brother?
2006. So, that was season 6.
Wow.
Yeah. So there'd been, just a few before. There's been so many after, and it's changed between different networks a few times too. There's been like different coats of paint and different iterations of the show since then.
Well, just to clarify for all the younger listeners, this was that period when it was literally Survivor and Big Brother. This was the start of
Ah,
reality TV. This was, as you said, a juggernaut. This was
was
monumental.
it was completely new to Australian television at the same time. So Australian Idol started at the same time,
Mm,
which is a talent show. It's not really reality TV, but the two were kind of this. It was Survivor, and I
mm,
don't even think Survivor was in Australia. I mean, Survivor wasn't on in it was on in Australia, but it was an American show.
yeah, exactly.
And there was Big Brother, uh, which had landed in Australia, and Australian Idol. And it was like these shows were in their total inception
Yeah,
and very experimental
definitely.
at the time. To have this hot pot of people from different cultures and experiences and, lifestyles all coming together and having to live harmoniously for, in my case, 100 days. I was on TV for that period of time. I was living in people's lounge rooms almost every day
Mm.
for 100 days. Is wild. Like a wild, wild, wild experience. And we had so much fun, but it was also emotional and confronting. They did things that may not float these days. For example, there was a lot of sleep deprivation. They would, put us to bed, let us go to bed at like 2 a.m. and then have us out of bed at ridiculous o'clock in the morning again.
What for?
I think that the goal was to get us into the most raw state possible, to have us be on edge. They don't want a slept, relaxed, well-fed version
Yeah.
of you. Oh no, 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 no. They want you to be stressed, on edge, fighting. Come on, that's going to make great TV.
True.
I mean, they're not evil, but they would feed us alcohol at certain periods, and definitely, I can't say they fed us alcohol because it's not like they were forcing us. There's me going, Big Brother, can we have some more alcohol?
Yeah.
But there was definitely periods of the time in the show where you could tell that the intensity was dialed up.
Okay.
So they definitely wanted us, raw, I would say.
Was it just you who could tell that, or everybody in the house could actually?
I think it's something that I can see now in hindsight. So I actually watched the show in its entirety for the very first time last year. At the
Wow.
end of last year, Big Brother was back on Australian TV, and I was contacted by a producer who said, "Hey, we're running the old shows on YouTube. Would you like to be a moderator?" And at first I was like, no, I really don't want to do that. And it's not that I'm distancing myself. I'm talking about it plenty, and I'm very proud of the experience, and I loved it, and I had a great time, and I'm actually super, super grateful for it, actually. But it's just, it's something that always stirs up an enormous amount of emotion in me. So my first reaction was, no, I really don't want to do that. And then I thought about it, and I made the decision that, yeah, that would be quite fun. So I did that. I moderated the chat for the group, not all the time, but for some of the time that I watched it. And it was beautiful. People were so warm. People that had watched it back in the day came back to watch it again with me.
Wow.
I got to see myself from a completely different perspective. Can you imagine watching yourself on TV for 100 days? Like, it was bizarre. There's this loud, audacious, redhead, telling everybody what she thinks, breaking down in tears over some very unserious shit. But at the time, it was very intense for me. But it was really, oh God, there was some cringe moments. And then I actually thought, no, I'm so grateful for that young woman who was so brave and so courageous to do something. I mean, I got myself out of a hole. When I went on Big Brother, I had no money in my bank account. I had no real prospects. I was working in a nightclub. Not that I didn't like it, but that was my life, was party, rinse, repeat, party, rinse, repeat. And Big Brother changed the trajectory of my existence immeasurably.
Measurable.
Yeah, because I came out of the show and everybody knew my name. I needed bodyguards to follow me around for a good few weeks because people would swarm me wherever I went. I had no media training and I was literally thrust into the spotlight. And I'm not suggesting that I didn't ask for that by any stretch. Going on a show like that, you know, comes with a big loud warning. You may be recognizable afterwards. Don't have sex on the show if you don't want to be known as the girl that had sex on the show. You know, we were given these warnings by the producers. It's not that we weren't told. But the level of fame was actually quite shocking to me. There are pieces of that first 2 weeks. You're a therapist, so maybe you can actually cast some light onto this while I have your ear. Coming out of that show, there are pieces missing from that first few weeks because it was so intense that I don't think I could properly process it.
Also, too, the dichotomy, right? Like you're in a house that you film 24/7, no exposure to the outside world, no real understanding of how many people are watching. And as you said earlier, the relationship that you're ultimately creating with Australia and they are creating with you, but without having any interaction to create it.
Totally. Like I didn't, you're right. There was a period towards the end, the last sort of 5 weeks maybe, where I would go outside on eviction night, and I was always up for eviction. Apparently I'm quite difficult to live with. Who knew? So I would go out on eviction night, and there was a hairdresser in the show that used to give me this huge bouffant hairstyle, hilarious. And I would go out and I would hear, Camilla, 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 from this audience that was situated in the Dreamworld complex. Wow. And I was like, are they saying my name? Like, it was bizarre, so bizarre. And I got to see that, watching it back last year, I got to see that. And that was really cool. It actually makes me feel a bit emotional. I just wanted to pick that young woman up and give her the biggest hug and go, it all works out. It's going to be good.
Absolutely.
Just keep going.
So in those final moments, do any of the producers, do you have any contact? Is there any insight that from a person who's been on the inside of Big Brother and had that experience to the people who are in the audience watching? Is there things that happen that you obviously don't see, or little insights that...
Look, there's definitely things that they edit, for sure. There's no doubt. But again, they can't edit you saying something you did not say.
Yeah.
Right? And so I appreciate that there are some shows, other reality TV shows, won't name names, where they've literally created scenarios by layering voices over, nighttime experiences. And I think one woman said that it made her look like she was having oral sex with it was a bachelor, I think, So one woman accused the producers of making it out that she'd performed oral sex on this guy. They didn't do that on Big Brother, not to my knowledge, not what I, observed by any stretch, and I have now seen it. But they do definitely, they edit parts out. I mean, God, it's boring watching 12 people do sweet bugger all for many, many, many hours of the day. So, of course, they're going to show the most intense parts where someone's fighting or they're crying or they're doing something.
What place did you finish, or did you...
I came second. So
wow.
narrowly came second, actually. And a guy called Jamie won, and we're still, in contact occasionally, not very much. But the intensity of that next period was a lot. And so I was approached by some radio stations who wanted to see if I was a good fit for radio. I think I went to Adelaide and tried out on a show, and radio was probably perfect for me in lots of ways. I like to talk, can you tell? And I had lots of fun things to talk about at the time. Also, I had this enormous profile. Yes. So they hired me for this radio show in Brisbane, and then they kind of pulled me aside and went, that really loud, audacious, bold version of you that you've been being, that's not going to work for our radio show. And I was so baffled. I was so confused. I thought to myself, haven't you been watching me on Big Brother all that time? Isn't it fairly clear who I am and what I'm like? And, you know, I think to my credit, even though I was loud and emotional and all those things, I think what Australia fell in love with at the end of the day was my heart and probably my authenticity at the time, you know, if I reflect on it. But they wanted the profile, but they really wanted a much more demure, gracious, toned down version. And so I really had to kind of start to bring a character to work to do that radio show. And I did that for a long time. I did the radio show for 7 years.
Wow.
After that, we went to #1. There was a few iterations of that particular show. I started with a group of people that ended up all getting turfed out except me. And then I was with 2 guys for a while. And that was, again, another really interesting, intense period of my life that like was so unplanned. And in that time, I met someone who also worked in radio. He was our sound engineer, actually, our audio engineer for the breakfast show. And we fell in love, and we fell pregnant really quickly. And I ended up having my now 18-year-old son. My gosh, can't even believe he's 18. Yeah, I had Charlie in 2007. So that was very quick turnaround, you know, from coming off Big Brother in 2006. And
that was in 2007.
Yeah.
So describing that year, so the first couple of weeks you said was just going from that, once again, that dichotomy, going from one to another in terms of worlds. What's that like? That experience like? Do you just get swept up? Does anybody pull you aside and say, Camilla, this is going to be quite intense? Like your life has just changed.
You know, after Big Brother, there was a psychologist who I spent maybe, I don't know, an hour with, maybe not even. Gosh, and one of the sessions was in a limo on the way to the after party. So I was not listening to a word she had to say. I was just like, no. I think I was probably 3 or 4 red wines in by that stage. But what was that experience like? I mean, all I can say is that I think there was part of me that wanted it. You know, there was you step off the train if you don't want it.
Okay.
You don't do it, you know. But yes, I was definitely swept up. There was nobody who was, you know, pulling me aside and giving me media training. The radio station that I worked at offered me some assistance, of course, but there was an expectation that I would bring it. Like they were paying me. It wasn't like, you know, it wasn't like I was there to learn. I had to show up and I was faking it. Fake it till you make it most days. Some days I really didn't know what I was doing and I was so out of my depth. There were times when I, you know, had to do like a gossip report or something on the radio show and my words would all get tangled and I would start to spiral and it was like, oh my God, I'm on live radio right now. Horrific. But again, like I have to just send loads of love and compassion to that young woman who was trying so hard to fit into a world that I'd had no grounding in that. I'd landed at the top of my game, quote unquote, like breakfast radio are these highly coveted positions in Australia.
Wow.
There's only a few of them. I'd landed in a metropolitan radio market and I really had no idea what I was doing.
Just so the audience can grasp this, how many daily listeners would there be?
I mean, 500,000, maybe maxed out at 750,000 people. Maybe less some days, you know, that was my understanding. I could be over-exaggerating that a little bit, but it was definitely in the hundreds of thousands. And I don't think I had any idea as I stepped into that little studio with my little mic at, 6 a.m. as you do. I would get up at 3 a.m., bleary-eyed. I just had a new baby. God, it was full on. Something to be said for being just 24 at the time and, having the energy for all of that. But I really did have no idea what I was doing. And I don't think I realized the gravitas of the experience. But, but that's kind of youth for you. I look back and I think, gosh, how'd you do that? How'd you do it? But you just do it.
You do it.
You just get on with it.
And you said earlier, but you feel you were natural for radio anyway. You love to talk. When do you feel that you really settled into that role?
I think after a good couple of years, I really, and maybe even after my son was born, something did switch in me. You know, my kind of desire to party was semi-quelled for a while anyway. Um, I became a bit more serious about the craft of radio because it is an art form in itself, you know, and the way it's structured is a real, it's very interesting. There's a lot of science behind it about how people like to listen and about how, you know, there's a lot of really interesting statistics behind all of that. And also the craft of how to create an interesting story and how to keep people interested. And I became much more interested in radio as a craft. But I really landed, I think, when I started to see that the ratings were moving too in the right direction. And I was like, wow, this is happening. And when we went to number one, you know, one of the things that I think I could definitely look at even in my life now is how I can be overly self-deprecating and sometimes struggle to take the win. And even when we were winning, I don't think I realized how freaking epic that was. Also, there was always a producer or a radio boss behind us going, foot on the gas, foot on the gas. Like, you don't slow down when you get to number one. That's when you really start to push. You need to get way ahead, because of course the competition is chasing you always. But I think that when I started to see the ratings moving in that direction, I was like, oh my gosh, this is really taking off. And it was bizarre. Like, my face was on buses and billboards in Brisbane. People knew me. It was quite an intense, interesting period of my life for sure.
Wow, and it sounds to try and even calibrate into that world, from trying to imagine from Big Brother shot into stardom, then trying to find your feet, and then actually, you know, you had so much influence in this radio show to the point where it's number one. And do you feel the Australian public really kind of took you under their wing and really adopted you in that way?
I think as a national profile, my gravitas was lessened by you know, growing roots in Brisbane and kind of going on this radio show. But I became you know, quite well known in Brisbane as a personality. I think that my personality has always been polarizing, or was at that stage anyway. So some people would be like, oh, I love her, or some people would be like, oh, I hate her. But then they would still listen, because sometimes polarizing is attractive anyway. I mean, how many of us go on Instagram and even the person that irritates us is, you know, we don't like unfollow them. We follow them, right? Don't we? Don't we all do that? There are sometimes people that irk us, that make us go, but I'm so curious what they're going to do next. So did people take me under their wing? Yeah, look, in some respects. I also think I was a little bit protected from the naysayers by the entity of Austereo, which is where I worked at the time. They were careful at, you know, making sure that if there were negative comments, they were taken away.
Okay.
So what happened after some time, I was, you know, at the top of the radio game in Brisbane, and I was approached by another radio station in the same market to move stations, which is a very controversial thing to even consider. I was unhappy at the time at Austereo. I felt like the people that I was working with were being paid a lot more than me. I felt like there was a real glass ceiling as a woman. I felt underappreciated. I felt like I was being made to do things that I didn't really want to do, you know, that it was just very important for me to use my profile at every turn. And I was quite exhausted with that. And so I was at a race day, and I said to one of the Nova bosses, we were all very familiar with each other because we all hung out in the same circles. And I said to one of the Nova bosses, ugh, so sick of this show, blah, blah, blah. And he went, oh. And a few weeks later, I got a call from the GM at Nova to say, we'd like to offer you a position. Are you serious about moving? And I was stunned. And at first, my first reaction to that was no, no way. But I thought about it, and they'd offered me a lot more money. And they basically said that my conditions would be a lot better. And I thought, who am I protecting here? Like, where do my loyalties lie? Do they lie with my family and myself and, being true to what I want and what's good for me? Or do they lie with this radio show? I don't think I went about it in the best way possible. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? But I made the decision to do that, and I moved radio stations, and of course, really burnt my bridges at Oz Stereo at the time. They were very angry. They just spent quite a lot of money on advertising and had invested an enormous amount in the radio show, and there's me jumping ship. And, within just a few months of that move, Nova took me off the air. And so I lost my radio career in that move. And some people have said, they were playing with the number one show. They lured the number one female off a female skewed radio station to another radio station. Then they turfed you out. Maybe I was just shit. Who knows? Maybe I was a bad fit. Maybe I just wasn't the right fit. Maybe a combination of all. And, if I'm really honest, my drinking had escalated again. And so I wasn't clear-headed. I wasn't making the best decisions. I wasn't doing, I wasn't behaving as my best self by any stretch. But that particular incident was soul-destroying at the time for me. It was so heartbreaking. My entire identity had been wrapped up in this idea of being a radio announcer and, having a profile. And, I kind of say that with a little bit of cheek behind it now, but at the time it was absolutely soul-destroying. I got called in to a busy restaurant one afternoon for a team lunch, only to discover that I was the only person from the team there, and they told me that it wasn't working and that, they were taking me off the show. And I just made such a huge move, and I almost couldn't stand. Like, I felt like I'd been winded. I almost couldn't leave the table at the end of the meeting. It was really shocking to me. And my drinking absolutely took off after that.
Wow.
Badly. And using drugs, I was very, very unhappy, and my relationship with my eldest son's father was dissolving at that time too. It was a huge shedding. It was very, very, a very challenging period.
So what did you do?
I partied like my life depended on it. Numb that. I dated the wrong people. And I can laugh about it now, but the truth was, in that I neglected myself and actually neglected my son, neglected my duties around being a mother. And after a particularly intense period, I made the decision that it was time for me to go to rehab, which, is a much longer story too, of how you arrive at a place where you think, I need to stop. I was still working at Nova. I'd been shuffled off to some side job just in the interim while they were working out what to do with me and my contract, because I'd signed a 2-year contract with them. And this pop star came in to the radio show. Oh, no, not to the radio show, to the radio station, and he played for us. And I caught his eye, and he said, "Do you want to come to my show afterwards?" And I was like, "Yeah, why not?" And we kind of became friends. And he said to me, "Do you want to come and join me in Sydney for the remainder of my tour?" And I was like, "No, I can't. You know, I've got a son and this is my life and whatever." And he said, "Okay, cool. Why don't you come to America?" Because I said, "I've got holidays in a few weeks." And he said, "Why don't you come to America when you have your holidays?" And so I joined him on this tour of his, and I got to see America from a tour bus. And that was a wild experience. You know, ironically, here's the crazy thing. You'd think that meeting a pop star and his entourage would mean that there was lots of partying. There was none. They were so straight. And of course, that made my drinking and using really stand out. Mm-hmm. The spotlight was firmly on my behavior on that tour bus. And he very quickly went, "Oh, God, I don't know about this girl." Mm. You know, once he got to see what I was really like, he kind of distanced himself. And so I was on this tour with him, and he was like, "Oh, you're a lot. You're a bit too much. And I need to work, and you're a lot." And that all came to an end when I lost my passport before he was supposed to be on Ellen one day. And there I am tearing my suitcase apart in front of Zac Efron and whichever other bloody, person is on Ellen for that day, because Warner Brothers are very serious about you having identification to be on their premises. And there's me, this, inebriated, stick thin, not sure what the hell I'm doing, like in a world of pain, girl in the middle of America. So I had to go to the embassy and get a passport and hightail my way out of there. And when I arrived home, I think I partied for a good couple more months. I say partied, it wasn't really partying by that stage. It was like drinking on my own. It was pretty pathetic, actually. And that's when I made the decision it was time to go to rehab.
Do you remember that exact moment?
It was not a hideous rock bottom. Like, I'd had a series of ugly moments, like the losing of my passport in front of a world famous pop star. You know what I mean? Like, that's not ideal. There'd been a series of rock bottoms. I came to having slept on a friend's couch, and it was just this moment of feeling empty and lost. And I got up and I went to my ex's house, and I sat on the end of the bed that we used to share together, and I poured my heart out. I just told him everything. He knew most of it, but I told him how much of a mess I felt and how much of a mess I had made. And he just answered me back with, "You look like you're about 15. You're acting like a child," which was the tough love I needed. And then he followed that up with, "If you continue on this path, I'm going to take your son away from you." Mm-hmm. And that was a very sobering moment for me. That was actually the moment that I went, wow, like, I'm a nice person I'm a good person in my heart. Mm. And I kind of had this out of body experience of seeing myself for a moment, of being so far off that path of being a decent human being. And so that was the moment, and I said to him, "Okay, I'm going to get some help." And so I did some investigating, and I ended up in a rehab in Thailand, which was really beautiful, deeply ingrained in the 12-step process, which many people will know. And for those that don't, it was a concept that was, I guess, thought up by a group of alcoholics in the 30s, and has saved many, many, many alcoholics and drug addicts' lives, and has, branched out into other fellowships like Al-Anon, which is for the friends and family of alcoholics, and CODA for codependency. So the 12-step process is well known as being a lifesaver for many people. Deeply ingrained in 12-step and also deeply ingrained in CBT and meditation and mindfulness practices. So I had this amazing rehab that I just happened to land at. And this is the thing, like whether or not you believe in it, like I was very much held by a power greater than me in that period. And always, actually, let's be real. But I was very much guided, by something greater than myself in that period. And I landed in rehab and I looked around and I was like, oh my God, I am not like these people. He is a heroin addict. Yeah. Oh my God, no, I do not drink like her. I was so comparing myself to other people and looking for the differences and not the similarities. And I was gently encouraged to see the similarities. And I think I was there for about 2 weeks before this very, I don't know, he was like a little pit bull, of a therapist. He really went for the jugular that particular day and basically told me, you are an addict, you are an alcoholic, you have neglected your responsibilities, you have neglected your child, you need help. You are not better than anyone here. It's time to start sorting your life out. And I was very humbled by that moment. It kind of broke me. But I was very much willing at the next meeting that I went to stand up and say, hey, I'm Camilla, I'm an alcoholic. And I made the decision, I think, to be sober for 3 months. Which, hey, from where I'm at now seems like not a lot. It seems like a drop in the ocean. But from where I was standing at that precipice, looking at 3 months was hideous. I mean, it was just 3 months of sobriety. What are you talking about? But I made that agreement with myself. I decided that I was going to try and be sober for 3 months. And I don't know, by the grace of God, I managed to do it. I left Thailand and I went straight to a meeting when I got home. Well, not straight. I went to see my son first, which was a beautiful reunification. It was so nice to see him and spend some time with him. But I went to a meeting as soon as possible. And I met a woman who had very strong recovery. It was actually at a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. And she agreed to be my sponsor. And she sponsored me through the Narcotics Anonymous program for the next year. Still in Brisbane, still very humbled by my exit from radio. My phone was not ringing hot with people wanting to hang out and see me and find out how I was. I felt very invisible and very forgotten, and yet I also felt like I was on the right path. I felt like I just needed to keep putting one foot steadily in front of the other, going to meetings, doing the right thing. And actually I had this amazing experience where my ex and I did this kind of rotation of 2 days on, 2 days off with my son. And so on the days that I had him, I couldn't do meetings at any time of the day. I had to do meetings while he was at school. And so I would drop him at school, and then I would have a few hours of very little to do. And I would go to this meeting in the city at 12 o'clock at a place called Perry Lane. It was in a run-down old church in this alleyway. And the people that went to that meetings were, some people on their lunch breaks, but not that many. Some people who were in, state-funded rehabs, who may or may not have been on a rotation of having to be in state-funded rehabs almost permanently for a large part of their lives. And there were homeless people at that meeting. And they were the most loving, kind humans. They absolutely loved me back to wellness. I would come in there and I would be like, my life and blah, blah, blah. And I was very I don't think I had quite landed in my body yet. And they were so kind. They were like, just keep coming back, keep coming back, keep coming back. They were welcoming and kind. And I'm so grateful for that. Gave me such an interesting perspective on people who we sometimes forget in our society or put down as being lesser in our society. I mean, my goodness, it was so the opposite of the truth.
And what you just described too, I mean, the phone being silent when you return, and sometimes thinking that the people you would or automatically think might be in your life and show up are not anywhere to be seen.
Yeah, it was interesting to see that. There were obviously a handful of lovely friends who were very concerned and wanted my happiness and health. A few of whom too were like, "You weren't that bad. What are you talking about? You didn't drink that much. You didn't use drugs that much." And I was like, "Oh my God, I don't really need to hear that." Because here's the thing, I couldn't stay sick to be the fun party girl that they enjoyed hanging out with. I couldn't stay unwell so that I didn't show up there drinking, because many of them drank and used drugs too. I had to get on with my life. Like, I had to do that path at that time. Just felt like it was so guided. There was like this strong wind behind me. I can't really explain it in any other way, but I was just pushed in this direction. And there were a lot of friends that fell away. There were some, like I said, that did stay close to me. Um, and some that, you know, we would go to lunch, as you do, we'd hang out and they would drink. And while that does not bother me one bit these days, in fact, I encourage my friends and family who like to have a drink, or many, to do exactly that. I want them to be the happiest, and I don't want them to feel stifled by my recovery or my choosing not to drink. I want them to do that. But in my very early recovery, it was very hard to be around alcohol and impossible to be around drugs. And I had this evening where I went out with a friend. He had a few drinks, and then I went back to his place where we'd hung out many, many times before, and I was microwaving some milk to make a hot chocolate. And I opened the microwave, and there was this perfectly curated plate of lines racked up of cocaine. And I couldn't, like, it was too much. I just shut the microwave, burst into tears, and said, "I have to go." And he was like, "What? It's not, you know," of course he was apologetic because he is actually a lovely friend. But at the same time, it became very clear to me that there were some people that were just safer than others. And if you were someone that was using drugs on the regular, you weren't a really safe friend for me anymore. I really didn't want to relapse. And, you know, like I said, by the grace of God, I've been able to put down some years of recovery since. But yeah, it was a really challenging time. We talk about this concept of early recovery in the rooms and in recovery circles a lot. But just to explain, it feels a bit like it feels like you've landed on Earth for the first time. You feel a bit like, well, I felt like a newborn baby, or you know, I was like, what do I do in these situations? How do I act? How do I not just accidentally go left and land at the bottle shop and start filling up the trolley? Like, what do I do with all this new time? Time felt endless. It was, you know, it was a very challenging, confronting period. But there was also these glimmers of beauty. I remember being about 3 months clean and sober and looking up at this tree, and I could make the outlines of the leaves. And I was like, oh my God, my sight has been impaired. What? Like, I actually got to see leaves, and I got to see this tree and the beauty of the sunlight shining through. And that probably sounds ridiculous to some people, but it was one of those moments that I was like, oh my, I have not looked up for so long. And if I have, my sight has been impaired. Like, I literally did not realize how much my drug use and my drinking had impaired my cognitive functioning.
Wow. Like seeing life in HD.
for the first time in many years, because it's gradual, it's progressive. So this stuff kind of slowly starts to, you know, your cognitive functioning and your, you know, processing is slowly whittled away. You don't like become an alcoholic one day and, you know, end up on your knees the very next. It doesn't look like that. It's very slow, and the lines that you cross start to get ever worse and, you know, more uncomfortable, and it just is this very slow kind of progression. But yes, it was the way back didn't feel that slow. The HD was like, wow, look at that.
Incredible. So at what stage in terms of time span did you feel more comfortable in your skin and this path of sobriety?
So that's actually quite a long question to answer, because I made the decision to move to Bali. I met someone in my very early recovery, actually, which I don't advise. If you're in early recovery, getting into relationships is probably not a good idea, but it can work if you're with the right person. And I met this man, and he was pretty certain that I was the girl. And he said that pretty early on. I don't know. We didn't have this whole red flag, green flag language, you know, love bombing / not, you know, / situationship. We didn't have all of that. Instagram had not taken off and given us a whole other perspective in psychological speak, right? But he said to me quite early on in our relationship, I think you're the girl. I think you're the girl of my dreams. And I know you have to go back to Brisbane. We met in Thailand. I know you have to go back to Brisbane, and I know you have to do this first part of your recovery on your own, but I will move mountains. His words. And I was like, whoa, wow, okay. And so I went back to Brisbane and I did my first year of recovery. And after doing long distance for that period of time, seeing each other fairly occasionally, we said we'd like to be together. And he said to me, you know, I'm not so keen on Australia, but if that's what it has to be, I can come to you. He's actually from the UK. And, you know, there was really nothing for me there. Like, I didn't have a job. My ex was in freelance photography at the time. Charlie's dad, my eldest son's dad. I don't think I've mentioned his name yet. And so I kind of was like, well, where do we go? And Bali became the hot topic of conversation. My partner, Heston, said, what about Bali? And so we considered it, and I said to my ex, hey, you know, met this person, we're kind of getting serious. I kind of want to get out of Brisbane. Would you be open for a sabbatical to Bali for like a year? Would you be open for a move? And he was like, hey, let me think about it. We were on good terms by that stage. I had firmly plugged myself into, you know, the fellowship of AA and NA, and I was, you know, working hard at getting my life back together. And I'd been a really like consistently good mum as much as I could to rebuild my relationship with my son. And so my ex came back after thinking about it and said, okay, if you want to go to Bali, we will come. Because I really didn't want to make that move without him to co-parent. It wasn't, you know, my living amends to my son was to be present in his life, and I wouldn't have left him for a relationship. It's just not something I would do. So I called my partner and said, hey, my ex has said yes. When? And we converged, all of us, on Bali on my very first sobriety birthday, which just happened to be the date that it all happened. And I got to go to a meeting and share that I was 1 year clean and sober, which was really beautiful here in Bali, which is where we are. And Bali has been a very beautiful home. There's a really wonderful recovery community here. There's also a lot of hedonism and partying and, you know, all the things, but I haven't had that in my world, really, while I've lived here.
Beautiful. So how long have you been here in Bali?
It's 12 years. 12 years, and I'll be celebrating a 13th by the grace of God, if all goes well over the next few weeks, on the 12th of March, I will be 13 years clean and sober. Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. If there is any final words of wisdom for your younger self or anybody out there listening.
Wow. You know, it's so trite and probably easy to say, but I think it's really important for us to imprint on our kids how important it is for them to be true to themselves. I think that society conditions kids to be a certain way. I think that parents project a lot on their kids. So I've since had a family. Since my eldest, I've since gone on to marry my husband, Heston, and we've had 4 children together, so I now have 5 kids. And the last 10 years has been really about like family, kids, birthing, breastfeeding, holding hands, kissing owies, snotty noses, all the things, right? And being very still in one place. And that has been like a huge chapter, really. Like it feels sometimes like you're doing nothing, but like a lot is happening. And I guess I've started to unpack quite a lot about how who do I want to raise in the world? What qualities would I like to see my children have? Or what did I not necessarily get as a child that I would love to give them? What things did I get as a child that I think would be wonderful for them to have? And one of the things that I think about often when I'm parenting my kids is how do I allow this person to be true to themselves? Because each of us have our own experience of the world, and there's no one size fits all, especially with parenting 5 kids of different age groups. And so I think that's really important, is what would I say to myself or, you know, someone else? Like, be true to you. What's right for you in this moment? Not about hurting other people, not about but that like kind of radical self-acceptance of what's really right for me, what's really good for me. I'm such a work in progress in this area. I have recently stepped into this whole new world of like, what do I want to be when I grow up? You know, because I've had kids, I've got a wonderful husband. I have a really good relationship with my eldest son's father. I've done a lot of really cool, wild, out there things. Like, what is it that I want to do with my life? And I got to kind of go way back and go, what was the first thing? What was the first thing that you really loved? The first thing that I really wanted to do with my life was music. And so, like the paths have taken me left and right and all sorts. But, you know, let's be honest, a lot of the things that I've done in my life have been in and around the music industry or have, yeah. But I've been able to kind of go back and tap into that and get really real with myself about like, this all ends. Like life is short. Stepping over I'm 42 now, and I think I was around 40 when I went to my diary. I opened the diary up and went, I'm going to like write down some goals. And like the last entry was from years before. And this can happen. This happens to mothers. And, you know, if there's any mums listening, I really like, oh my God, I did not think I was going to be quote unquote one of those mums who lost themselves to mothering or parenting. But fuck, it happens. It really happens. And I was like, oh my God, who am I if I'm not going to have another baby, having just had my 5th, you know? And by the way, as a side note, I also see how people end up with 6 or 7 kids or 8 even after they have a big family, because you get into this like rhythm of having babies. So anyway, 5 beautiful children. What do I want to do with my life? Go to my diary. Haven't made an entry in like so long, and went, I don't know. And so I went on this kind of inward journey of what's next? And I tapped into the idea of like, what do I want to do with music? And so I learned to DJ, which probably seems hilarious to some people because like there are a lot of DJs out there. Like, do we really need another DJ? But it just felt like something that I'd put on the back burner that I'd never done. And so I did it. And then I enrolled in a music production course and I started producing some music. And all of that took like radical self acceptance of like, what parts of me have I ignored? What parts of me have I not given life to yet? And what parts of me would I be sad or regret not living? Like, what parts of me that do I want to bring out into the light now? And what parts of me haven't I kind of experienced yet that I would be really sad if I was laying on my deathbed and went, oh, would have been really great to be a DJ. Which sounds hilarious, doesn't it? But yeah, it's been so fun and so cool and interesting to see how my kids have been so into it and supportive, and how my friends have been so supportive, and how my husband's been so supportive. So yeah.
Absolutely beautiful journey.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's a pleasure having you on, Camilla. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks so much, Taylor. I so appreciate it.
So there you have it, the beautiful journey of Camilla Harper. Camilla is living the island vibes as she raises 5 beautiful human beings and follows her lifelong passion of music. Keep an ear out, because I feel something special is just around the corner. And if things are feeling misaligned in your life and you're looking to create more balance or simply someone to talk to, then head over to www.plumplanes.com for all information of my services. If you like the podcast, please give it a rating, as it really helps to spread the good word. My name is Taylor Jardine, and this has been Your Story, Your Medicine. Appreciate you taking the time to listen.